Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom. So glad to have you part of our service. It's so wonderful, the Zoom technology that we have, that you can have a full Rosh Hashanah morning and Shabbat morning service. In the Talmud, we find the following story in Bava Batra. The rabbis taught, when the temple was destroyed for the second time, large numbers in Israel became ascetics, binding themselves neither to eat meat nor to drink wine. But Joshua got into conversation with them and said to them, "My children, why do you not eat meat or drink wine?" They replied, "Shall we eat flesh which used to be brought as an offering on the altar, now that this altar is in abeyance? Shall we drink wine which used to be poured as a libation on the altar, but now no longer?" He said to them, "If that is so, we should not eat bread either, because the meal offerings have ceased." They said, "That is so, and you can manage with fruit." "We should not eat fruit either," he said, "because there is no longer an offering of first fruits." "Then we can manage with other fruits," they said. But he said, "We should not drink water, because there is no longer any ceremony of the pouring of water." To this they could find no answer. He said to them, "My children, come and listen to me. Not to mourn at all is impossible, because the blow has fallen. To mourn overmuch is also impossible, because we do not impose on the community a hardship which the majority cannot endure. The sages therefore have ordained thus: a person may plaster their house, they should leave a little bare. A person can prepare a full-course banquet, but they should leave out an item or two. A person can put on their jewelry, but you leave off one or two. For so it says, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I remember not, for if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy." This anecdote describes the trauma that the majority of Jews experienced after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, and subsequent loss of Jewish sovereignty and independence. The feeling of paralysis led them to give up on the joys and simple pleasures of life. This response to tragedy is still very much applicable to today. The world we live in is full of trauma, suffering, and tragedy, not only in the context of war, genocide, and terrorism, but also in the personal lives of many who have suffered from racist attacks, gender-based violence, and rape. The stress of modern life has been intensified by the COVID pandemic and the resultant irreversible change to the way we live our lives. The death of loved ones, the loss of jobs, and the resultant financial hardships. The American physiologist Walter Bradford Cannon coined the term fight or flight response to describe the instinctive reaction to danger expressed by animals. This theory can be applied to the events that led to the destruction of the Second Temple. The Jews' first response to the threat posed by Roman suppression of Jewish learning and culture was to fight. First Jewish revolt against Rome led to the siege of Jerusalem and the eventual demolition of the Holy City and the Beit Mikdash. As described in our Talmudic narrative, many Jews responded to the destruction by flight, not physically fleeing from a specific place, but a psychological flight from living life. About Joshua's advice to the people that he came across is sound. Mourn the loss of the temple, but don't let your sorrow overwhelm you. He gives practical examples of how to acknowledge and process the sense of loss without denying oneself the gift of life. Since God is the God of life, we cannot serve God by suppressing our will to live. When Rabbi Joshua argues that if we deny ourselves meat and wine based on the fact that the temple altar on which they were offered no longer exists, then we should deny ourselves bread, fruit, and even water. When he says this to the ascetics, he does not mock them, but illustrates the dangers of an extreme response to trauma. We live in a world of instant communication, in which we are exposed to images and verbal descriptions of atrocities and violence, not only from mainstream media, but from citizen journalists who capture events on their cell phones and broadcast them with the tap of an icon on a screen. We're also bombarded with statistics about the health and economic devastation caused by COVID-19 and conflicting opinions about the source of the pandemic, many of which are sensationalist and conspiratorial. Social media is also rife with so-called remedies to prevent succumbing to COVID-19 virus, concoctions based on fanciful pseudoscience, not sound scientific knowledge. Can only process so much before we respond with flight, become detached and unfeeling, emotional strategy of survival. But in order to be human and humane, we have to acknowledge the severity of the pandemic and respond in an appropriate manner without being overwhelmed and being paralyzed into a state of inertia and insensitivity. At the same time, it is paramount that you hold on to life and to the conviction that humanity and the world is inherently good. You must enjoy the pleasures of the divine gift of life. These Yamim Noraim, these days of awe, are a tool that facilitates this approach. Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of creation. Besides being the new year, it is Yom Horat HaOlam, the day of the birth of the world. According to rabbinic tradition, Adam, humankind, was created on Rosh Hashanah. The idea of Rosh Hashanah being the day of the birth of the world is repeated thrice during the shofar service to remind us that the new year is a day of renewal, a chance to return to a time when everything was Tov Ma'od, was very good. The literal translation of the Hebrew phrase Yom Horat HaOlam is the day of the pregnancy of the world. On Rosh Hashanah, the world is pregnant with possibilities. On Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the human potential for righteousness. But the celebration is tempered with the need to process our failings during the past year, as individuals and as communities. Hence, we have the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of repentance, during which we seek forgiveness from people in our lives so that we can stand before God on Yom Kippur and reconcile with our Creator. On Yom Kippur, we deny ourselves the physical pleasures of life for one day, emulating the aesthetics of our Talmud story. We express our remorse for our failure to live up to God's expectations of us, much like our ancient forebears who mourned the loss of the temple by refraining from consuming meat and wine. But unlike the Jews of our story, we follow the wisdom of Rabbi Joshua by returning to life. At the end of the Ne'ilah service, the shofar is sounded to signal the end of the fast and the successful pardoning of our transgressions. The breaking of our fast is more than just a relieving of our hunger and thirst, but breaking fast is a mitzvah, indicating our return to an embracement of life. Indeed, 5 days after Yom Kippur, we begin a week-long festival during which we give thanks for our material well-being and celebrate the divine gift of an abundant harvest by waving the lulav and etrog and eating our meals in a temporary shelter. The festival of Sukkot is the very opposite of Yom Kippur, with its focus on the physical world we live in, as opposed to the purely spiritual realm with which the Day of Atonement is concerned. Like the corner of the house that remains unplastered, the Sukkah reminds us that there's much work to be done to address the inequalities of the world in which millions of people are forced to live in temporary shelters every day due to poverty, war, and persecution. As we embark on another year, may we be inspired by Rabbi Joshua to process the ugliness of life while enjoying the beauty of life. May we always be enthused to take action in order to mend the world we live in, by balancing our need for flight with our obligation to fight. I wish you all a Shana Tova, Techatevu, Techatemu. May you be inscribed and sealed for a good year, and Shabbat Shalom.